I'm aware of fear that is almost continual in me. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and in spite of my awareness of the anxiety and fear, it does not seem to lessen. I know you talk about in any given moment there's never a problem, but when you're terrified all the time, there is a problem because you are afraid. Happens to be here, and of course is connected to what we've just been saying. Now this is somebody here who a lot of the time is in a state of fear or anxiety. It could be related to something in his past or his parents or perhaps other generations too. What to do? You can't get rid of being terrified, being in a state of fear most of the time. What you can do is not to allow the fear to rise up into your mind and control your thought processes, because then that would be a normal thing when you are identified. The emotion that's there rises into your mind, and then it causes you to think thoughts that correspond to the emotion, fearful thoughts in this case. And then you would get a vicious circle building up between the emotion of fear, the thoughts you think, which are fearful thoughts, which give more energy to the emotion. So the more fearful thoughts you think, the more it perpetuates the fear that you feel. So to sever the link between the emotion that you feel and your thought processes, what you do is, and this is not pleasant, but it's possible, you place your attention on the emotion, you feel it. It's unpleasant, but it's not going to kill you. A child will probably not be able to do that if it's intense. It might have to escape into some through dissociation or whatever, possibly. But an adult, fear, it's not going to kill you. It might kill you if you allow it to rise into your mind, because you might even commit suicide if you can't stand this anymore. But it will not kill you in itself. So feel it, and then you shine the light of awareness on it. And you may have to do that a lot. And at first, it's not pleasant, but it's a burning up of the old emotion. And the only way to get rid of it is to accept it as it is right now. If you want to get rid of it, you can't. But that complete acceptance of what is actually the doorway through it. It's the transformation of it. And if it's extreme, that can become your main meditation in life, and that will become your main teacher. And that will bring about your transformation. In some people's lives, there is one huge disability, one huge source of suffering or pain. It could be a physical disability, it could be a situation like being in prison, it could be an emotion like that you carry inside that doesn't want to go away. In certain people's lives there is one major thing that seems to color your entire life and affect your entire life, and seemingly makes it impossible for you to ever be free or happy or joyful. But if that one thing, if you surrender to it, allow it to be, and make it as a continuous spiritual practice, you need nothing else. That one thing will transform you if you surrender to it. And there will come a point when you are grateful that you had to go through that, because it will have taken you, it will be the greatest spiritual teacher. So there was, I believe, if I remember correctly, even Epictetus, that philosopher, who said, it's not the situation that makes you unhappy, it's the thought that makes you unhappy. If I remember correctly, he was also crippled, he couldn't walk properly, and he was a slave until he became freed. So it's often humans who have one major disability or some huge difficulty in life, and that becomes their catalyst for spiritual transformation. If they can surrender to it, allow it to be acceptance, I call it acceptance of the seemingly unacceptable. Stephen Hawking's case, for example, I don't know to what extent he awakened spiritually, but he accepted the unacceptable, and so certain miracles happened. He survived. Nobody would have thought it possible, and his life became fruitful, on one level at least. Acceptance of the unacceptable is the great source of grace in this world. It's just a miracle. But it can be an arduous process, especially for this questioner here, who is here. It may take a while. You have to endure it and be with it and surrender to it a lot of the time. And that's your meditation. You don't need transcendental meditation. Your pain, your fear is enough. Be with it. Allow it to be there, and gradually you will notice the transformation. That's the alchemy of transformation, the alchemy of suffering into... The old meaning of alchemy is base metal. There comes this guy who experiments in a chemical kitchen, and he transforms base metal into gold. So there have been, in medieval times, there was a lot of interest in alchemy. So that would be the material level of alchemy, but on a spiritual level, alchemy is the transformation of suffering into consciousness. And that only happens if you bring surrender to the suffering. This is how, the reason why in India, for example, you have holy men, or also, I suppose, holy women, who inflict the most incredible suffering on themselves for years. There's a man who stands on one leg continuously, he even sleeps on one leg. Or you might sleep, on the famous example, on a bed of nails. can't think of other examples, but no, it's incredible. And the idea behind it is voluntarily embrace suffering so that it brings about a transformation of consciousness by surrendering to it. I would not recommend that is the way for you to go. Life has enough. What life gives you is just right for you and enough. And some of you might say, more than enough.
Good morning.
I am overwhelmed with fear and anxiety and panic. And underneath that, there's the yearning that you talk about. And that's what got me here, even though I've been feeling this way for maybe 4 or 5 days. My mind
That says it all.
I know.
Right? My mind. Right? So it's not unusual for some people, to get frightened for something deeply within us, something deep in our unconscious. You know, you sign up for something like this months in advance, and it seems like a fantastic idea. And then as the time comes closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, those sort of deep unconscious parts of your psyche can come up, and they view this as very threatening. Right? I'll die. Yeah. I'll never make it. I'll go crazy. Yeah. Something absolutely unimaginably terrible. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it's going to happen. Like that? Right?
All of that.
Yeah, okay. It's just because that's part of this whole process of becoming conscious is, in psychological jargon, they would say your shadow side emerges too. Everybody just wants to see their lightness and their brightness and their beauty, and that's wonderful. But also what emerges is the shadow often emerges, right? The shadow that's frightened and afraid, and it's the force within one that is basically life denying. It's the thing that says no, 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 no. And that force will get dredged to the surface at the mere anticipation of coming to something like this, right? So the fact that it's been dredged to the surface doesn't mean anything's gone wrong, although it may feel that way. Doesn't mean that any mistake has been made, although it may feel that way. It just means that part of your mind space that has been pushed aside into a very unconscious corner of your psyche has now begun to arise, right? And it's a bully. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
In other words, a bully threatens you, right? A bully works with fear and threat and aggression. And there's this part of the psyche that tries to derail us from becoming conscious. And the way it derails you is by being this sort of internal bully. It creates fear and anxiety, and it's this sort of threat inside of you. Something terrible is going to happen. And so, I get asked the question all the time. This isn't uncommon. What do I do about this? And of course, what this energy loves inside of you, this energy of fear, this internal bully loves a good fight. So it loves you to try to get rid of it. Fear loves you to go to war with fear, because that's what it thrives on. It loves for you to try to get rid of it, to try to transcend it, to try to go beyond it. Any relationship with it that's in any way based in conflict or denial, fear loves it because it feeds on it. Right? You noticed? The more you've tried not to be afraid, the more afraid you get. The more you try not to be anxious, the more anxiety you feel. So it feeds off of itself. Right? But when you actually just allow it a great space to be, allow in your mind, grant permission for there to be almost infinite space for fear and anxiety. In other words, you grant it permission to be. And what happens? So we experiment with it just in the moment, okay? What happens when you actually grant fear, anxiety, the permission, total permission, absolute permission to exist right now? If you just inwardly say, this fear, this anxiety has absolute permission to be here, 100%. I'm allowing it to be here and right now.
It doesn't know what to do.
What's that?
It doesn't know what to do.
No, I don't imagine it does. So what did you want to ask me about it?
Is it possible for it to prevent me, for it to overwhelm me totally?
If you fight with it, yes.
It just seems so...
Immense?
Yes.
I know.
It seems like... It seems impossible just to let it be.
I know. See, letting it be also just means really being totally honest with yourself. I'm afraid. I'm frightened. I'm anxious. You see, because when you're totally honest with yourself in that way, it has an effect. Because almost always we're trying to change our experience, are we not? If it's unpleasant, I want to change it. That's what I mean when I say grant it permission to be. That admit that it's there. Just admit that it's there.
Okay.
So you're afraid. You're anxious. You've been afraid hundreds of times in your life, haven't you?
Yes.
You've survived so far.
This feels different.
It's just a little bigger because this cuts a little closer to your core, right? Have you ever heard about this is a phenomena that's actually quite well known in people who work with people who are dying. It's not unusual for someone who is dying to in a very short period before their death, they can be almost completely comatose, uncommunicatable, really out of it. And all of a sudden, sometimes, they'll just all of a sudden sit up in bed and be as clear as a bell and have rational communication and be talking to people as if nothing at all is wrong with them. And they'll be that way for like 5 minutes or an hour or whatever, and then all of a sudden they'll slip back into that place and boom, they'll be dead. So something comes up in some people right before they die. This life force sort of has its last hurrah, and it creates great clarity, and it seems like they're in perfect health, and then boom, then they're gone. And the same thing happens, but it's just in reverse with spirituality. It's very often that when you're right on the edge of seeing something very deep, all the fear, all the shadow side within you will rally to the forefront of consciousness quickly and powerfully, right?
Yes.
It'll rally its forces. It will seem like, where did this come from? It hasn't been there. And it will present a very powerful, overwhelming face, right? And you'll tend to think, I can't take this, I'll go crazy, I'll never make it through, right? It has this, so all the forces of illusion are being rallied to make sure that you don't see what you're just on the verge of seeing.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
You've heard the old saying, it's darkest before the dawn?
Yes.
It's kind of romantic when you read about it, isn't it? You're experiencing it. This is the darkness before the dawn, okay?
Okay.
And if it's any help, it's like, that's why people wrote things like that. It's darkest before the dawn. Out of compassion, like, God, let's leave a little clues to somebody else who comes along the same way, and they might like to know somebody else has experienced this before. And then it's all okay, even though it doesn't seem okay.
That helps.
In fact, a lot of times in spirituality, just before things get really okay, they feel really, really, really not okay. And once you've experienced that a few times, you kind of get onto it. And you stop sort of worrying about it. You know, okay, this is how things work. The forces of illusion rally everything within you. Usually when a deeper consciousness is about to present itself. Unfortunately, I can't give you like the 10-part program to get rid of all this fear. Right?
Right.
And even if I could, I wouldn't, because that wouldn't help.
No, what you said helps, because I sense the truth to that it may come up again, but I will recognize it somewhere along the way and not give in to it the way I am now.
You just don't make it wrong. Because see, that's the biggest thing. When people experience fear, the intuition, the instinctual thing is to think, something's wrong here. I feel great existential fear, anxiety, dread. Something must be wrong. Right? But I can tell you, spiritually speaking, often, very often, when you have those kind of feelings and experiences, it's not that something has gone horrifically wrong, it's that something is starting to just begin to go right. Don't necessarily think that all the illusion within you just surrenders like this. It might, but very often it's like trying to pry the fingers open from somebody who's been clutching a tree branch for a long time and thinks if their hand is let go, they'll fall from the tree and go splat on the ground. Right? That's all that's happening, you're just holding on. But it'll pass.
Promise.
Good to see you with you. You let me know. There's a fun story of a It's an old story of some, I don't know if he was a king or a prince, but somebody of high rank, and he got this spiritual sort of yearning came inside of him, and he started to see the futility of all the power and riches and everything that he had attained, and so he called in the local sage and asked the sage if the sage could give him or tell him something that could bring great peace and freedom in his life. And the sage says, yes, I can do that. And the sage left, and he came back a week later with a ring. And on the inside of that ring, he'd had inscribed, "This too shall pass." And he said, every time something arises that is difficult or good for you, just recite the phrase inside this ring, "This too shall pass." And it will bring great peace and freedom to you. And you see, when we do that on more than just a mental level, to say it mentally isn't so powerful, "This too shall pass." But to really inside, intuitively, get the deeper significance of it, it actually allows the mind to not grasp in that underlying dimension of the unborn, undying, uncreated, the underlying dimension of presence is experienced, is felt, arises within consciousness. And it's anytime you have connection with that, it brings a great sense of peace and well-being and open-heartedness.